Well, after the disappointment for Mercedes that was Monaco, they really needed to strike back at Red Bull, and they needed to do it quickly, but I don't think Azerbaijan was the race for them to do that in, and I think the results really back up that statement. So let's talk about the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Now this week I'm planning to make 3 videos, and they'll be on topics that I will soon divulge, not yet though. And I'm making these because I don't think I'm going to be able to make a video next weekend. I'm going to see, but I don't think so. So don't get your hopes up. Anyways, let's talk about Azerbaijan. It's one of my favorite tracks for racing because even though you're getting DRS overtakes, at the start and the end of the race, when nobody has anything to lose, they're putting everything on the line, the cars in these interesting places. It's just chaotic always. And there's always a safety car or two, or a red flag. There's always something like that. So that was always going to be an exciting race this season, and I had a lot of hope for that. So, let's talk about it. Practice sessions, Mercedes looked really weak, and in practice too, for the first time since Nico Rosberg took out Michael Schumacher in 2010, they had no cars in the top 10, Mercedes. That was a huge blow for them, and it looked as though they had created a car that was not really well suited to the street tracks. And that was really backed up by their Monaco results. But moving on to practice 3, it got very interesting because Gasly was in first place and Perez was in second place. Verstappen had crashed out. But interestingly enough, Hamilton was in third place with both of the Ferraris being in 4th and 5th. Now last week on the podcast, if you remember, I had said that I thought the Ferraris were going to come up strong in qualifying and be okay in the early stages of the race. And qualifying backed me up. Leclerc on pole, Hamilton second, Verstappen third. Verstappen was only third because he didn't have that time in FP3 to get a soft tire run in. I think if he had been able to do that, he probably would have been on pole, but I got my prediction right anyways, and I'm smug about that. But excitingly enough, I think that this could be a bit of a turn of form for Ferrari, always, other than, the fact that in the race, it wasn't so good, but we'll talk about that later. Sainz was 5th, which was interesting to see, again backing me up on my assumption, and Gasly was in 4th, which was also very exciting to see, but Perez was in 7th, shocker of a qualifying for him, and Norris in 6th, but he did get penalized very harshly. Ricciardo in 13th, and Alonso in 9th, and Bottas in 10th. Remember that Bottas part, because he had tacked on too much downforce, so he had no speed on the straightaways, which just really hurt him. And interestingly enough, Stroll and Giovinazzi both hit the wall in qualifying and stopped the session. Now the race start, alright, I've got an admission to make. It was at 4:50 a.m. and I didn't wake up early enough. I missed the first 3 laps. I'm sorry, I just didn't wake up early enough. So I missed the race start, but from what I've pieced together, Leclerc held on pretty well. And that was surprising to me. I thought he'd get eaten up off the start, but he was okay. And Hamilton got by him first, but when Verstappen got by Leclerc, he had this surge of pace and got by Hamilton. And then Perez started catching on Hamilton, and at that point I thought Hamilton had a problem, but he didn't, because he hadn't radioed in. He was actually talking about the pace of the Red Bulls, and the interesting thing about that is I think, although he could qualify well with it, he could not keep up that pace throughout the entire race. Sort of like Ayrton Senna in 1994, he could qualify well, but the car that he was driving was so difficult, he just couldn't keep it up through the race. Obviously, Senna had a more dramatic ending to that season than Hamilton hopefully will, but I think the sentiment is similar. Nonetheless, it was still really interesting, and at the time the pit stop phases came up, I thought it was going to be a 2-stop race, but everyone went for the hards, which meant they were trying to go 1-stop it. I thought that would have been risky. I would have gone for a soft, medium, or if you could really make the mediums last long, a soft, medium, soft, so extra pace at the end of the race. But with how the race ended, I don't think that would have been possible. Now, as it continued on, Stroll was the only one who hadn't pitted by the lap 30 or so, and it seemed as though he was dropping off a little bit pace-wise, but not too bad. He seemed okay. And then it happened. Lance Stroll, at over 200 miles per hour after coming out of a corner, had a dramatic tire failure from the Pirelli tires and clattered into the wall. And that was crazy because A, they didn't red flag the race, but it was safety car, and it was just debris everywhere. It was a absolute another part of chaos for that race. Verstappen had pulled out a big lead, so it instantly decimated that. And by the time that it all got cleared up and it was time to go again, Verstappen pulled off again, and Perez was ahead of Hamilton. Hamilton really just had no chance to get by anyone there because A, even if he got within the range of the DRS, he still couldn't overtake Perez. There was a couple of nail-biting laps for me where I thought he was going to get Perez, but he never ended up doing that. And then, he just couldn't manage it. And at that point, I was wondering, well, could Verstappen really get to the end of the race on the hard tires? And around lap 43, it happened again. And this is where it gets, for me at least, a bit annoying. Because, look, if Red Bull had pitted Max Verstappen, they would have gotten him in. They probably would have put him on a set of softs, and he would have lasted, hopefully, till the end of the race. Would he have gotten back and overtaken the lead? No. But then there wouldn't have been the red flag period where Hamilton would then mess up the start. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what happened in the red flag period. Hamilton was talking about trying to, no need to overtake here for this part of the race. He'd like to get ahead, but there was no need. It's a sprint, or excuse me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And yet, when it came time for the grid restart, yes, it was a grid restart, it was nail-biting for me because I had a lot of drivers that I was happy with the positions they were in. I just really didn't want them to get swallowed up. And then the restart happened. Before I start this grid restart section, I'm going to quickly mention that one of the videos this week is going to be talking about the Pirelli tires. And I don't have enough time to cover it in this video, but another video this week will be covering the Pirelli tires, so please stay tuned for that. That's going to be an important one. I think this is a more damaging race for the Pirelli reputation than Silverstone last year, and personally, I think this is probably just as reputation damaging for Pirelli as the 2013 British Grand Prix. So, we're going to talk about that later. Now, let's get on to the restart. Now, the first thing I noticed when people pulled up to the grid was, A, George Russell pulled into the pits. He had an engine problem. No one talked about that, and he finished the race, or he didn't finish the race from the pits, but he had to leave the pits first. He had to get something fixed. It was confusing. But on the grid, there appeared to be something wrong, because Mr. Lewis Hamilton had smoking brakes. Now, there are a couple of reasons you can have smoking brakes in F1, and it's generally not a good thing. It looked as though he had boiled his brake fluid on the in-lap, which is a really bad thing, because that means that the brakes will lock up pretty much the first chance they get, and they'll be really hard to cool down, because once you then lock the brakes, you add more heat to them. It's a dangerous, vicious cycle that you really want to stay out of. So the fact that he had boiled them didn't look good, and I was wondering, oh no, is he going to crash into Perez? Because at this point, as a Red Bull fan, I was worried that the last chance for salvaging any points from this race, Perez winning it, would be sort of destroyed, really, if Hamilton screwed it up. And Hamilton did screw it up, but not in the way that you'd think. Hamilton had a better start than Perez, but Hamilton also completely overshot the corner, the car didn't turn in, and he locked both front brakes. Now, here's where the second video I'm making this week comes in. That next video is going to be about what's going on with that Mercedes car, and I think there's something illegal braking-wise on it. I'm going to cover the entire system, radio messages, maybe even footage from the race if I'm legally allowed to use it, we'll see. But now let's get back to the restart. So Perez was leading it, and his only contender was off the track. I went from oh no, what's going to happen to absolute glee on my face when that happened. Oh, I would have loved to have filmed that reaction. Anyways, though, that had happened, but then Alonso had the greatest start of his life. Remember, 2012, 2013 at Spain? Imagine, those starts where he's coming from, back down the grid and attacking. He went from 10th to 6th in, 2 seconds. It was insane. Alonso is back, and for those who were thinking that my prediction about him being good this season were wrong, as long as that Alpine holds up, he's going to do something great with it. Now, what that meant was that put Vettel into second place with Hamilton out, and Gasly into fourth again, with Leclerc in third. which was really interesting because, he had been out of that third place spot for most of the race once he had been jumped by Hamilton, Perez, and Verstappen. Now, going back and talking about the restart, you had people like Lando Norris making up some spots, and let me just tell you the final order and I'll tell you what happened. Perez stayed in first, 25 points. Vettel stayed in second, 18 points. Gasly third, 15 points. Leclerc fourth, 12 points. Norris fifth. Gasly got by Leclerc on the main straight, a really ballsy move, especially considering his engine was down on power, and he was able to shoot it up the inside. Alonso 6th, as I already mentioned. Yuki Tsunoda 7th. Carlos Sainz 8th, which is a good recovery considering that he was down in 15th for most of the race. Ricciardo 9th, so he salvaged points, which is important for him. And Kimi Räikkönen 10th, so now he scored his first points of the season in a really well-judged first corner thing. His teammate Antonio Giovinazzi clearly isn't learning because he screwed it up into the first corner onto the restart. And I'm sorry, but if you're going to be an F1 driver who's competitive all the time, you don't make mistakes like that. Kimi didn't. He got by him. Bottas 12th, really hard race for him. Mick Schumacher 13th, even though he had a terrible pit stop, he still beat Maz, not the truck, the driver. And Hamilton was in 15th. Along with Latifi in 16th, and a DNF for Russell, DNF for Verstappen, not classified for Stroll and Ocon because they both DNF'd too early. But I want to quickly talk about another clip that surfaced that could have something to do with Alonso's comeback, and it's of the Alpine engine. And this is a really interesting phenomenon because the Alpine engine was doing some interesting things in practice, including propelling Fernando Alonso to the fastest ever top speed ever in an F1 car ever. Have I said ever enough? I don't know. But it was really interesting. I think it was like 390 to 380 kilometers an hour. Fastest I've ever seen an F1 car go. It was unbelievable. He had full battery deployment, full engine deployment, a tow, he had DRS, he had everything. He was tucked up behind, I think, Leclerc for that lap. I'll see if I can put it on screen. If I can't, I can't. But that was really interesting. So now I believe Alonso is the fastest man in F1 history. Not, for race wins or anything, but fastest in terms of top speed. So that's cool. Not much else to talk about this race, because, we're going to digest those other problems in other videos, and if they come out the same day as this video, watch them. If they don't come out the same day, watch them the next day. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, consider liking and subscribing, and if you don't like the video, what are you doing? And thank you, goodbye.